Amy. So to start.
Just wait for Amy's signal though.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Literature Live, Brightness of Books. We have been doing this series online right through the pandemic lockdown, bringing in new books and their authors for discussions and conversations. Do spread the word so that more and more people discover the brightness of books. Today we feature Sanjay, author, columnist, and former spokesman for the Congress Party. That word former tells a story in itself, and I'm sure it'll come up during the discussion. He will be discussing his new book, The Great Unraveling, with Veer Sanghvi, writer and columnist, who writes with sharp insights, whether it's on politics or food. After the conversation, there will be a Q&A session, so do send your questions. Now over to Sanjay and Veer. Veer, take over.
Yeah, thank you, Anil. Thank you so much. Hi, Sanjay. How's the book doing?
Well, according to my
I'm plugging it for you. Yeah.
According to my publishers, they seem to be very delighted. But publishers are never satisfied, so I guess I still got some hard work to do.
Your publishers are Amazon, right?
Yep.
Yeah, they started messaging me when they heard about this also. So they're obviously very proactive, which is a good thing in the world of books, no? Okay, listen, I wanted to ask you about the reviews of the book. If you read the reviews of the book, and I did, you would think that Sanjay Jha was in the Congress, was treated very badly, was very unhappy, has walked out and written a bitter book about how terrible the Congress is. So I read the book with that preconception. And it's not that at all. That's not what the book is. The book is about the state of India today, the way things are. And yes, there is something about your personal experiences with the Congress, but you tend to blame the Congress for not providing an effective alternative. It's not a diatribe against the Congress. Is that fair?
I think, Veer, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, I've got one selfish interest for writing the book. You know, a lot of people ask me this question, why do you write a book? And I feel if I have one deep, personal, private reason for writing it, is the fact that, you know, I don't want my daughters to grow up in a country where they feel that we are such a fractured polity. You know, they keep telling me repeatedly that, you know, one of them is already working abroad, the other one is going to study to the UK next year. And both of them are very clear that if India continues down the road where it is currently headed, they may not decide to come back here ever at all. And that to me is a very disturbing reality that one needs to confront. So you're absolutely right. I mean, that's my personal obsession for writing this book, because I meet many parents and many young people who have similar angst and apprehension. And as is pretty obvious from the events of the last couple of days, India has tested positive for being an illiberal democracy.
So let's talk about the events of the last few days. So let's stretch it further back to its genesis. Did you realize when the farmers' agitation began that it was going to assume these kind of proportions and there would be this panicky response with people being asked to send tweets supporting, saying India against God knows whoever, but whatever? Did you realize it was going to snowball this much?
Well, you know, the Modi government, Veer, has got an inherent political arrogance since they won the absolute majority in 2014. You know, as a student of economics, I can tell you that when they passed the Aadhaar as a money bill, I mean, there cannot be a bigger sleight of hand, which is being done in broad daylight in a parliamentary format, for heaven's sake. And it tells you that the government believes that it is here in perpetuity. I go back to Amit Shah's comment that the BJP is going to be here for 50 years. And trust me, Veer, this is not an hyperbole. You know, maybe they see the Congress in doldrums and they do begin to believe that this fantasy can become a reality. But it also breeds a hubris. So, you know, if you look at this bill, I have personally, and I need to tell you this upfront on our conversation, I have supported the bill in terms of its overall, shall we say, features, because this is what even the Congress actually said in its manifesto. So I don't want to do a U-turn like politicians do. But I do want to make a point that The way they shepherded the bill through Parliament, no discussions, even the voice vote, everybody knows was a virtual fraud. And the fact that ultimately the farmers have been on the streets in a cold night, shivering away. I mean, I can tell you there has to be something fundamentally flawed with the way it has been perceived by the farming community, whether it's Punjab, Haryana, or the rest of the country, doesn't matter. And I think this government has actually ended up with egg on its face. The fact that you have Rihanna's tweet, which, by the way, endorsed a CNN article. So I didn't understand why Jaishankar, instead of perhaps questioning CNN, was questioning Rihanna. So we are in a Alice in Wonderland situation, but the government ultimately is paying a price for its arrogance and authoritarian character.
Okay, let's go back to you said that many of the provisions of the bill did not strike you as being particularly offensive. And this business about giving farmers greater access to the market has been talked about by agricultural economists for a long time. So why do you suppose this bill created this kind of response?
Well, one thing is obvious, and I think many analysts haven't really pointed this out. But we'd go back to the 2014 Lok Sabha campaign. Narendra Modi campaigned there to the farming community with the most, shall we say, phantasmagoric promise that we will give you a MSP, minimum support price, cost of production plus 50%. And guess what the government did after they came into power? They went to the Supreme Court and they said, they filed an affidavit, a written affidavit, and they said this promise cannot be implemented because it will lead to a distortion in market prices. They're right, it would.
Which it will, yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, which it would. So the fact of the matter is that the farmers never trusted this government. I keep maintaining this point that if you look at the 2019 Lok Sabha results, Modi and the BJP did not even talk of unemployment, jobs, farmer crisis, and there was severe farmer crisis during that time. I think Congress won Madhya Pradesh because of the Mandsaur violence. I live in Mumbai, and I can tell you the long farmers' march from Nasik onwards. I mean, this was incredible. The protest was real. It was live. Tamil Nadu farmers were there in Delhi for weeks on end. So it was a reality that India was in deep trouble, or shall I use the most strong word, in deep shit where the economy was concerned. Modi won it, and the BJP won it for only one reason. When there is a crisis in a country, Veer, and you're a seasoned journalist, you know that better than me. When India faces, a cross-territorial terror threat, authoritarian demagogues make massive political capital out of that. George Bush had a rating of 90% after 2001 9/11 attacks. And I think the BJP just simply railroaded the Lok Sabha election. But the fundamentals of the economy couldn't change. And that has come to bite the BJP right now. So I think the farmers, in short, don't trust Mr. Modi and his promises.
But isn't that generally true of farmers in the political establishment? Because if you look at what the bill says, it says life will be easier for farmers. Many people from outside of the prince can come and buy their stuff. It sounds good in theory. And I see this parade of urban agricultural economists, many with degrees from abroad, appearing on television saying how wonderful it is for the farmers. The problem with that is that the farmers themselves, who it's supposed to be so wonderful for, are saying, listen, it's not wonderful. Please take this back. And I often wonder, is it basically a problem of trust? Because if you listen to the farmers, when the government says we'll change this and we'll change that, they say we're not concerned with specific provisions. We just don't trust you. We believe that politicians will use these laws to allow their capitalist friends entry and will create an oligopoly which will affect us badly by fixing prices. So the issue, there's no evidence necessarily that that will happen, but the central issue surely is one of trust. The farmers just don't trust the government.
Absolutely. And I think the poor don't trust this government. I have always believed that Rahul Gandhi should have stuck to the line of, Soot Boot Ki Sarkar all through the 5 years. Because while crony capitalism did happen during the UPA time as well, there is no denying that under Mr. Modi, it got a very remarkable legitimacy with the electoral bonds. And maybe we can talk about that later. But you're absolutely right, Veer. If you look at the farmers today, they do feel that, at the very beginning, that they were going to be taken here for a ride. And that is unfortunate because end of the day, the bill has some foundational merits that the government itself is goofed on. Now, how can you have people calling all farmers Khalistanis, terrorists, separatists, urban naxals? I mean, it's absurd. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, yes, there can be a couple of elements who can infiltrate these movements. I agree the movement probably has a leftist character. That doesn't make them, Marxist, for heaven's sake. So I do believe that the government is paying a price today. And I need to say this, the way it has reacted to Rihanna and Greta Garbo, I believe.
I'm going to come to
that.
that. But
I mean,
it makes
us a laughing stock.
You've raised a larger point that the farmers who were old men camping out in the Delhi cold, leaving their families, leaving their farms behind, they were dismissed as anti-nationals, as traitors, as separatists, as Khalistanis. Why has it become a knee-jerk response on the part of the establishment and some of its most vocal supporters to argue that anybody who disagrees with the government policy is by definition anti-national? Why is the most common response to criticism not a reasoned response, but go to Pakistan?
Well, Veer, frankly, I mean, I have always felt that, India doesn't just have an economic recession. It has a democratic recession. There is no dialogue. If you look at this government or the BJP since 2014, you look at Mr. Modi or Mr. Amit Shah during the Gujarat period, they cannot stand dissent. For them, democracy, deliberation, and discussion is only a cosmetic lip service to be done to Indian democracy. But democracies have a problem because, I think a lot of us, I mean, whether we are political parties or civil society, we got to recognize that, to borrow from Joe Biden, democracy is precious, but democracy is fragile and you got to fight for it. And I think when you look at the character of this government, it's gone after a pregnant woman who was arrested during the time of the pandemic. I thought it was a monumental shame. We all know that Delhi riots happened, and the people who said "Desh ke gaddaro ko goli maro salo ko" are scot-free. We all know who are the people who are being targeted, and the message is very clear. And of late, when my colleagues Shashi Tharoor and Rajdeep Sardesai, Zafar Agha, I know him because he's part of the National Herald team. You can't find a more decent gentleman than him. I tweeted, he won't even hurt a mosquito who's probably trying to infect him with malaria. And he has got a charge of sedition against him. So you have a government that frankly believes in the fact that if you paint the opposition as an enemy of the state, so the Congress Mukt Bharat, the Congress is anti-national, the Congress is pro-Pakistan, the Congress is pro-China. You know what happens? You polarize the environment. And the BJP is always a massive beneficiary of polarized politics. And this is an old story. Go back, even Vinayak Damodar Savarkar said the same thing then. He called the Congress as traitors. He called the Congress treacherous. So it's not just Modi and Shah who are doing it today. It has been part of the RSS BJP playbook for a long time.
But, when regimes are weak, they get easily rattled. If you look at the last years of UPA 2, when the regime was under constant attack, they behaved in extraordinary stupid ways. They took Anna Hazare much more seriously than he needed to be taken. They met with these guys and said, we will give you the Lokpal bill. And these chaps who were then so arrogant said, no, take our bill wholesale or nothing at all. They sent the police in to break up Baba Ramdev's rally. They behaved strangely and irrationally and perhaps unforgivably. But that's a government that was in a lot of trouble. This is one of the strongest governments India has ever seen, stronger perhaps even than Indira Gandhi at her peak. Why does a government that is so strong have such a thin skin?
Well, partly is also because of the fact that I think the Congress doesn't know how to win elections, but the Congress is definitely better in governance. The BJP knows how to win elections, but I think it's awful in governance. So I think both of them have both their feet on a banana peel here. I think where the BJP is concerned, if you go back and look at their entire history over the last 6-7 years now, I think the BJP's basic premise is that let's go for spectacular because that grabs the public mind. I mean, end of day, I do believe that authoritarian characters or demagogues always like to keep the public's emotion at a very heightened level. Because ultimately, I think, the Congress was selling data on how many people they lifted above the poverty line, how the GDP growth was over 8%. All Modi ji said was, मैं विकास लाऊंगा, ये लोग भ्रष्टाचार में डूबे हुए हैं. There went 2014. And I do believe that the ability of certain leaders to use the rhetoric of polarization works remarkably. And I have done a little bit of research in elections to tell you this, Veer. Voters very often take the call of which party to vote for, sometimes even at the booth, and maybe actually 24 to 48 hours earlier. And the Congress foolishly believed in 2014, for example, that it had done a great job over 10 years and therefore it should win. Many of them underestimated Narendra Modi, and I've written that in my book. But people had forgotten about what you did between 2004 to 9. The last 2 years, they saw high inflation. They saw, jobs were getting erratic. The economy had slowed down, and the Congress was called the most corrupt party in the country. And the Congress had actually made Anna Hazare into a mini Mahatma Gandhi, which was the ultimate insult that the Congress could have done to the man who was, in my opinion, quintessential Congress party man. So, you pay a price for your stupidity, honestly.
The other thing that intrigues me about this government, because it seems anti-English, the word Lutyens, which I perhaps deliberately mispronounce and call Lutyens, has become essentially a code phrase for the old English-speaking middle class. So a government and a culture that is so, let's go back to the days when India had the atom bomb in 2000 BC, etc., and is so inward-looking. Why is it so obsessed and so sensitive to foreign criticism? I mean, what did that Rihanna tweet say? It just had the CNN article and said something about, let's talk about this. Why would that provoke such a hysterical response?
I think if you read the Prime Minister's comment when he talked about the Khan market, I mean, he was clearly insinuating to, to Seema and to other people. Because, ultimately, what is the whole approach, right? Is to say that, there is a certain section of India, I speak English, I live in Mumbai, you're a famous TV personality and an author. So we guys are supposedly elite. We are an establishment that doesn't understand the ground realities of India. So here's the objective of Mr. Modi's BJP, while they take all the funds from the richest corporates in India, and probably their economic policies are meant to make India's monopolies and oligarchies a lot more stronger. But in the eyes of the common man, these English-speaking guys who live in urban cities and make very sarcastic or funny tweets, these guys are against you because they don't understand you. They have benefited at your cost. And I think there is this inferiority that comes in because of the simple reason that, end of day intellectuals challenge you. Intellectuals or liberals never are supposed to live with the status quo. And, if you look at the BJP, it's not even status quo, they're regressive. I mean, you give the RSS and the BJP a chance. I mean, they will at some point, look at their comments on women, for example. I mean, they will take us back to the Jurassic age. So I think there is an inherent drawback. You look at how the BJP handled Section 377, Veer. At no point did they say that they were there for the abolition of Section 377. Right. When they realized it was likely to happen by the courts, they said, we will, go by whatever the court's verdict is. This is the same government which said that you and I don't have a fundamental right to our bodies. They actually did not believe that in the right to privacy. So if a government really doesn't believe in all that, I mean, we should not be very surprised. I do feel that all of us appear in the morning to be very gobsmacked by all the ridiculousness that is going on. I mean, it's crazy what you read every day in the papers. But the fact of the matter is we should not be surprised. A large part of India, unknown to itself, is probably walking into one of the biggest booby traps we've seen in a modern democracy.
I agree with much of what you said. A lot of it is class envy. In a way, this new middle class, the emerging new middle class, are Manmohan Singh's children. These were people who were created by the 1991 economic reforms, which made many more Indians prosperous. And a new middle class was created from people who were previously not necessarily English speaking or middle class. And you can understand to a certain extent why that middle class, in its assertion, resents the old traditional middle class. And that resentment and envy comes out in this kind of stuff that we were talking about. But if you want to be this new middle class, this new India that doesn't care about the old elite and its preoccupations, then there's something very sad if that India collapses with one tweet from Rihanna. Why should you care? Most of these chaps who are getting so agitated about Rihanna had never heard of her. Why suddenly has it been a dog whistle or some Pavlovian response that they've got into such a panic? I mean, they don't care about Rihanna. They don't listen to the music. Why should it bother them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you that my sense is that the Congress abandoning the middle class has really given Mr. Modi and the BJP a very solid, formidable voting bloc. See, the middle class is not just the people who are living in Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, and the big metro cities. I mean, a large part of India has become middle class. I mean, it depends upon how you define it by a certain economic or mobility criteria. And the fact of the matter is that the middle class today is a creation of the Congress party.
Right.
And contrary to the popular myths that a lot of people have, is that as societies become prosperous, they become liberal. It's not true. You actually become a lot more conservative because the basics are taken care of. And then people begin to think of my class, my religion, where I pray, and what my neighbor looks like. Because before that, you're in the rat race for survival and growing your constituency of wealth or prosperity. So I do believe that if you look at even, for example, America, many Republicans resent the fact that the Democrats want to give better healthcare or education to the immigrants. In India, I can tell you in Mumbai, I have narrated a couple of stories in my book, but there are people I meet who hate the Congress, not because we are seen as, a party which is secular or pseudo-secular, because they say you take our money and you give it to the poor of this country. Now, these are the same guys who will come on Twitter and celebrate the Indian spirit, blah, blah. But, when it comes to supporting the 300 million people living below the poverty line, they don't want the government to do it. And therefore, this is the big, I think, dilemma that the Congress party needs to overcome. You see what Mr. Modi has done here, and this is why the Rihanna story becomes relevant. What Mr. Modi has done is he's created something for the poor, whether it's the Ujjwala or the roads or the Swachh Bharat or, low-cost housing, etc. And at the same time, he keeps the middle class happy by, talking about the pride of the muscular nationalism or, the hyper-nationalism pitch. He invokes that, national security, etc., etc. And we all know that he's keeping the business class more than happy. He's having them eating out of his hands. So I think the ability of Mr. Modi to do this balancing act amongst all is working like magic. I just read a tweet by, our friend Bhupendra Chaubey, by the way, just before I came in. And guess what Bhupendra says, Veer? Bhupendra tweeted that, hey guys, chill out. We believe that this entire Greta and Rihanna issue is actually going to play into the BJP's hands. And truly, if that is the new India, then you and I have a lot to worry about.
But Sanjay, coming back to what you said, the secret, to the extent that there is a secret of Mr. Modi's success, is one, offer genuine welfare measures to the poor, which, I mean, you can say anything about it, but there's no doubt that there have been welfare measures that people have benefited. Play on the envies, the insecurities of the new middle class, offer them a muscular nationalism. That's two. Three, keep select businessmen happy, so you know that there will never be a problem on that side. And four, always appear to be above the fray. If you see Mr. Modi now, even during this whole Greta thing or Rihanna thing, he hasn't really gotten involved that much. It's other people who do it. He is like some great sannyasi who's above it all, who we should look up to because he has abandoned earthly desires to turn India into Bharatvarsh. So this four-pronged strategy appears to be working terrifyingly well. Do you see it going wrong?
It worries me, Veer. Honestly, it does. Because, I remember between 2014 to 19, love jihad was a term which in many of the TV debates I attended was referred to by most of the hosts as the reaction of the lunatic extreme right-wing fringe.
Yeah.
Now, these are laws. These are laws already being executed by governments run by the BJP. In my opinion, when love becomes a four-letter word in a society, when the Tanishq commercial is receiving this massive backlash and, people say, hang on, why isn't the girl a Muslim girl? I mean, look at the kind of issues. I can't even contemplate what minds work to come up with these theories. It tells you that somewhere down the line, progressively, we are deteriorating here. And I think the thing that a lot of Indians and especially the middle class has forgotten is that you don't live in an economy of GDP and FDI and ease of doing business and GST and a budget and a V-shaped recovery. You live in a society first. And a society is about inclusiveness, it's about good neighborly relations, it's about freedom to pray, freedom to sing and dance and wear and eat what you want. I think we are forgetting that. And the math behind that weed is very straightforward. I very often try to understand the BJP by wearing the BJP hat. And I say, listen, if I was a BJP guy, I would say, I don't care about Veer Sanghvi or Anil Dharkar or Karan Thapar things. Frankly, I care a damn for them because I've got 78 to 80% Hindu population that is largely and continues to remain largely inclusive, secular liberal. But if I can convert just 25% of them into a little hardliners and make them believe in the fact that we must reclaim the good old, that Hindutva renaissance in India, I actually am impossible to dislodge unless the opposition has some great, rabbit out of the hat. And I think to that extent, BJP has got the math right. Just think about it, that Congress got around 19% vote share. And in I think if you get 19% vote share, you can actually get around 110 seats guaranteed in parliament. BJP in 2009 had 18% vote share and 116 seats in the Lok Sabha because the BJP votes come in a very concentrated fashion. So if the BJP were to be guaranteed a minimum 20 to 20%, they are never going to get less than 140 seats in any Lok Sabha. And then you can know which way it's going to go.
But Sanjay, I agree with what you're saying, that if you can manage to weaponize Hinduism and make it a vote winner with nearly 80%, 75 to 80% of the population being Hindu, you just need 25% or 1/3 of that to win elections. Once you do that, the Muslim vote, the Christian vote, the so-called secular vote, all of that becomes irrelevant because of the sheer numbers that Hindu voters have. But you can maybe run a country, win elections that way. Can you run a country? Democracy by itself is worthless unless it's liberal democracy. And all democracies are essentially coalitions where even the people who didn't vote for the government of the day have their interests taken into account, that space is allowed for dissent, that minorities who may not feature in the government scheme of things have to be given some sense that they have a stake in India. Now, all of that has been given the go-by because of the brute majority of Hindu votes. The danger with that is once you start telling Sikhs, "Arey, you're Khalistanis," once you indicate to Muslims that you're only here on our sufferance, is that these people who shed blood for your country, who fought wars for you, who've always felt completely Indian, will grow up, or the children will grow up, believing they don't have a stake in India any longer. So once you deny people a voice, they feel they have no stake. What happens then to the India we bequeath to our children?
Yeah. Veer, that is a disturbing reality that we need to confront, and we need to do so with a very cool head. Just think about it: that you have 303 members in the Lok Sabha from the BJP. Not a single one is a Muslim. It didn't happen even in the last Lok Sabha election, and at least 14% of Muslims are there in our country. Look at Uttar Pradesh. The BJP does not even give one Muslim candidate there a ticket. I mean, so when you said that the secular vote becomes irrelevant, it already has, because the BJP has redefined the electoral calculus here. The new political algorithm for the BJP is that if you have 30% or 25% guaranteed Hindu vote that they believe they have converted into hardline or loyal BJP voters, which is their big membership drive they did, then they don't frankly care. And it's been established in Uttar Pradesh where the BJP has such a humongous majority. So, the truth is that we are at the moment, I believe, in some kind of a tinderbox. You're absolutely right. Can India make 200 million of its own citizens irrelevant in our political narrative, which I write in my book? I really don't think you can. We are probably somewhere down the line headed for a prolonged, disturbed civil life. But I have an inner faith, maybe. I mean, this happens when you probably have kids who are in their 20s. that you begin to then find some kind of a optimism in the history of the country. And I do believe that the diversity of this country could be its saving grace going forward, because what works for some will not work for the others. Therefore, this is not a country that you can very easily balance by trying to polarize them at a consistent level. I am also bullish that hate is unsustainable, that at some point this sectarian divisive the kind of chasms we create, at some point, I think the people will stand up and say, I've had enough. But for that, you need a robust civil society, which I think is doing a great job. But I want to tell you here very clearly, if Indian democracy has to be saved, political parties have to fight. And there, my good old grand old party, unfortunately, is under-delivering.
Which brings me to exactly what I was going to talk about. That what we've talked about so far is the major theme in your book. What we've done in this conversation is updated it to reflect the events of the last week. But pretty much everything you've said is already in your book, which is why I think it's such a powerful book. The minor theme in your book is the failure of the opposition. So let's take it from there. You were a spokesman for the Congress party in UPA too. Right? You went on television every night to defend, I thought, the indefensible. But essentially, you guys created Modi, no? You had a prime minister who would keep quiet, who cowered, who listened to a lady who was head of the party, but who was unwell, therefore was not available. No decisions were taken. The government was completely paralyzed. And you made up for this, thinking that you were all wonderful, by sacking anybody against whom there was even a minor criticism. You guys thought this would mean that the Congress was seen as a super clean party because we sacked Bansal, we sacked Shashi, we sacked everybody. Instead, what it did was the absolute opposite. It was taken as confirmation, as proof that you really were a bunch of crooks because you were acting against them yourselves. So you had, therefore, a crooked government in the public mind and a silent leader. Those are the two things Mr. Modi capitalized on. Here is a visible leader who is never silent, and here is a government that doesn't go in for scams. So didn't you guys throw it all away?
We did. And I have mentioned that in my book, that too much democracy. We heard Amitabh Kant say that. Mr. Modi's great admirer, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, actually, the big stockbroker, the big bull of the Dalal Street, who said democracy hinders growth. I think if anyone is guilty of too much democracy, it is the Congress party. I mean, we had 206 seats in the Lok Sabha. Why would you not engage with other political parties, even the BJP in the opposition, but invite Arvind Kejriwal, the Bhushans, Kiran Bedi, and Arvind Kejriwal, and say, I'm going to frame a bill and I'm going to take your inputs, and you're going to be taking the final call on whether it's good enough. I think that was absurd. The day, Veer, when 5 senior ministers of the government went to the Delhi airport to receive Baba Ramdev, I said, the people of India, I think, realized we had voted a government to run this country. And here you are actually collapsing in the face of people we don't know, we haven't even heard of. So the truth of the matter is that I think the UPA did it to itself. You're absolutely right. Let me give you an example. On the 2G and the coal scams, supposed scams, I don't call them scams in that sense. 1,76,000 crores, 1,86,000 crores. I used to go on television and I had done my calculation. I thought these numbers were ridiculous. They were a farce. But the Congress party's defense was so weak. And we in India, people like to see the leaders speak. You can send Manish and Abhishek and all the good spokesperson of the party to defend you. But people wanted to hear from Dr. Manmohan Singh, Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi. And the three of them, each of them had their own reasons. Dr. Singh, of course, did his press conferences, but he would be more monosyllabic. Mrs. Sonia Gandhi never wanted to, really engage with the media, barring a soundbite. Rahul, for some strange reason, had total contempt for the media. So if the 3 top leaders of the party don't want to talk, Narendra Modi just came in and filled the vacuum. End of story. And much later in NDA 1, when the court said that there was this whole 2G scam was a massive issue by itself, the Congress did not even defend it. They did not go to town saying these were allegations without a foundation.
Yeah.
What do you do?
And many of them were facilitated by a person you guys appointed, the CAG.
Yeah.
He was a
Yeah.
Congress appointee, I think
Yeah.
it's probably the first time in the history of the CAG where they held press conferences to announce what their results were, where they did sort of speculative figures or what could have been earned, and therefore created all kinds of bogus scams where those figures were, by any standards, completely unrealistic, as has been shown out by time. Yet the Congress never successfully conveyed this, and the media, to our shame, happily went along with the lies. No?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you, I mean, can you imagine a CAG report landing with the media before it goes to the parliament?
Yeah.
I mean, the Congress had so much to talk about. I mean, when Kapil Sibal actually made a very sound, reasoned argument about zero loss, he became an object of ridicule.
Yeah.
And the Congress looked like, a bunch of losers right from the very beginning. So I do feel that if Mr. Modi is today the prime minister, I think to give it to him on a silver platter, I think the Congress probably needs to claim a credit. In fact, we should go to town saying, we have a stake in this government, a minority stake perhaps. I don't know what will be the valuations, but we have a stake in this government because Mr. Modi would not have been there had the Congress party not given him a red carpet welcome.
It wasn't the BJP that made Modi prime minister. It was the Congress. It wasn't Advani. It was Rahul Gandhi. I mean, we have to live with that. But now that we're talking about the Congress, the problem many people have is that a lot of intelligent people in the Congress are saying that Rahul has made the wrong decisions. There's been a problem. And yet, what people ask is, are you guys against dynasty, or are you against dynasty only when it doesn't work? If Rahul had been successful in the first term, would it have been fine to have continued with the dynastic leadership?
Well, the fact is that politics is all about numbers and ideology. And I think it's a question of individual choice whether you want to put ideology first or the numbers second. I come from the school of thought that if to save Indian democracy, the Congress needs to lose one more election, I'll be okay with that. But I can tell you 99% of the politicians in parties just survive on power. Power is the glue that keeps people together. And when I look at the Congress today, I mean, if you look at Rahul, for instance, and I think he's a very, very nice guy and he's got good intentions. He's well informed. He has a certain vision for India. I can't deny that. But if you have not been able to kind of create the chemistry with the people that you were expected to do, if the BJP has damaged you by the Pappu tag, people haven't forgotten the Times Now interview with Arnab, because he could have done it by giving many interviews during the time, which he hasn't done. I think end of day, I believe, I don't want to be as ruthless as a football coach in the EPL, where you have one bad season in a sack. But I do believe even in politics, at some point, you need to ask yourself, if I am not cutting ice here, maybe I need to take a break and give somebody else an opportunity. And I do agree with you that if Rahul had done well in 2019, I don't think this would have been a topic of discussion. But the reality is that we lost, and we lost miserably. 44 and then 52 seats. So Veer, I think the bottom line is that the Gandhi magic has indeed waned. I'm not saying it's obliterated, it's waned. Can it be resurrected? Maybe. Who knows about tomorrow? As politics, things change in a week's time. But at this moment of time, I meet too many people who come and tell me that if the Congress was led by a non-Gandhi leader, we are on. And I do believe there is merit in the argument that India doesn't want to see necessarily a dynastic person from the Congress. People are willing to live with a dynasty in maybe RJD, in Mulayam and BSP. But the Congress is not a family-run private limited enterprise. And I think people have higher expectations of the party that's governed for 55 years. So Rahul, if he's smart, instead of listening to his bunch of sycophantic coterie that, or the cabal that he has, he can take a backseat. He announced that he would. If he walks the talk and the Congress gets a new non-Gandhi leader, I do believe the Congress is in the race.
But you see the liberal problem. As far as many reasonable liberal people who are not inimical to the values the Congress represents see it, it's a choice now between dictatorship and dynasty, neither of which is a particularly attractive alternative. And all you guys wrote letters to the Congress. Your argument essentially is dynasty is okay when it works, yeah, but this guy is not working. It's not an ideological argument.
I agree. And I personally, if I'm asked to choose, I would choose a dynasty over dictatorship any day. But the fact is that the dynasty at the moment is not, kind of perceived to have the competence to lead the country. I think Rahul's mistakes have been far too fundamental. I think the mistakes he's made is not worked on his Hindi. In India, if you speak good Hindi, यदि कोई राजनेता का हिंदी बहुत शुद्ध हो, बहुत प्रभावशाली हो, तो लोगों को लगता है कि यार ये बुलंद आदमी है, इस पे जज्बा है, ये
Yeah,
हमारे देश को
His
प्रेरणा दे.
Hindi is better than Sonia Gandhi's, and she won you 2 elections.
I agree
It's
with
not
that.
just that.
I agree with that. But now you're juxtaposed against a Mr. Modi. I do believe that the ability of a leader to evoke emotions is powerful. A friend, I think somebody wrote that in an article, and I completely agree with it, that leaders need to have an emotional connect with the audience.
Yeah.
And I think, you can't talk data, stats, analysis. Like, for example, in conversations, you can drop a few numbers here and there, but people want to feel you. What people remember is the emotions that you left behind. And I think Rahul needs to work on all these a lot more. But the bottom line is not Rahul. I think Congress at this point of time needs to think about India. How do you stop the BJP juggernaut? And I can tell you that the sense that one is getting, that if all of us liberals, and I know all of us are genuine liberals, if we were worried that India will probably go down a rabbit hole in 2019 to 24, trust me, it's a very genuine apprehension. This is just the beginning. And if this government were to not do well electorally, they could actually become even more draconian and heavy-handed.
I'm going to take you back to the early 1980s when Mrs. Gandhi was re-elected after the failed Janta experiment, and despite the horrors of the emergency, because people felt, familiar phrase, there is no alternative, and so they supported her. The opposition wasn't very large, but what did happen was that the opposition shifted from parliament to the streets. You had secessionist movements in Punjab, a possible secessionist movement in Assam, which they had to work very hard to nip in the bud. Problems in the northeastern states, more and more civil disobedience on the streets. Do you think that if the opposition to Mr. Modi coalesces, it won't coalesce around a political party? It will be like the farmers stir, people on the streets fighting for their rights.
Well, I do believe that Mr. Modi's government has been extremely, has had heavenly benedictions on it. Providence has been in its favor. Before the pandemic, India had found its voice all over again. I remember Yashwant Sinha once telling me that India has forgotten to protest. But if you look at the CAA protest, the NRC, NPR protest across the country, when people were, singing "Hum Dekhenge," I think there was, the complete rise of the Gandhian protest. Peaceful, non-violent, coming together, and this was not just Muslims, but there were people from all over the country. So I do feel that it was happening when it got nipped in the bud. But your question is absolutely right. The Congress party needs to understand, and maybe the pandemic has held us all back, and people can't really do much because of these restrictions. But ultimately, you got to go down to the nukkards, to the villages, and all that. And this is where one fact needs to be told. I have learned a lot by watching the BJP. You see, we can't win by just beating the BJP. Now, can I be angry with Mr. Modi because he's ambitious? I don't think there's anything wrong in being ambitious. If Amit Shah is very well organized, well, we got to learn how to be organized. If the BJP knows how to manage the booths, the block, the district, the state, and the national level, create transparent elections, raise monies, well, you got to find a way too. So I think hunger, ambition, these are things that the Congress has to feed from within. Can I tell you frankly, Veer, I feel so disappointed. And let me give an example of 2019 Lok Sabha elections. We were routed. I was there. My book starts with that in my prologue. Yep. I found so many people in the Congress for whom it seemed like no big deal. It was okay. We lost. And I was like, man, you should be agitated. You should be angry. There should be a feeling of frustration because you're gone for another 5 years and who knows what's going to happen to India. So I think if the Congress doesn't feel the pain and the anguish of loss, which I think is a leadership-inspired issue, frankly, I don't think we are ever going to get our story back as quickly as we should.
Okay, I'm going to hand this back to Anil, but before I do, one last view, which is, do you think we're all too close to the events? If you were to pull back and look at India since the last general election, Mr. Modi has tried several things. He's tried the CAA, which was part of his agenda, which, as you say, led to protests in the street, and they seem to have taken a decision to go slow on that. Mm-hmm. He abolished special status for Kashmir, and I'm not sure how well that's worked out for him, given the status of things in Kashmir now. He promised to improve relations with America and forge a very strong link with President Trump, even hosting some sort of election rally for him. I'm not sure how well that's worked out for India. And then he said he would change the farm laws and there would be a great new capitalist economy in the farmer sector. I'm not sure how well that's worked out for him either. So you could, if you were to go away from day-to-day events, see this now as a government that is unable to successfully implement its will. And therefore, despite the impression we get of its super strength, there are vulnerabilities. The problem is the Congress is even more vulnerable.
I think, Veer, that's a very succinct description of what is today's truth. This is the truism that we can't walk away from. I mean, think about it. Despite the pandemic, a humanitarian crisis created by the migrant, the entire trauma that they went through after the lockdown, a defunct economy, minus 23% in its first quarter, it may have revived slightly thereafter. The BJP goes and wins Bihar. It does well in Telangana. It's making inroads into Kerala. I mean, these are manifestations of the fact that if you don't have an opposition that can run with the baton, I mean, Narendra Modi is going to win and the BJP is going to win because people are going to say, we are unhappy, we are disillusioned, but who do we vote for? And that is a terrible crisis for a country with 140 crore people, so many national parties, and people don't find an alternative. Therefore, I do feel, I agree with you. There is every reason to believe that the BJP can lose 2024 and you can have a different political formation there. But there has to be leadership. And somebody from the Congress has to take the call is to bring all these disparate elements together. Because when political parties come together, I think they are not going to be easy for the BJP to defeat.
Okay. Anil, I think we could go on forever, but I think we should actually let people ask questions.
Right. That really was very interesting and lively. You could really go on for a while. But a few questions coming in. I'll combine two. Anand Mohan says to you, Sanjay, if you are so discouraged by the current dispensation, why did you abandon the Congress? And the second one is from Jamshed Irani. Where do you stand? You're anti-BJP and not with the Congress. Where does that leave you with your convictions?
Well, to be honest, I did not abandon the Congress. I still haven't actually. The Congress abandoned me. The Congress actually ditched me. I fought for the Congress during the most difficult times. But I don't want to. This is not about. I don't want to do a TV commercial on me. The fact of the matter is very straightforward. I was so agitated with the way we were running. I mean, you lose 2 Lok Sabha elections. You don't have a conversation. I wrote an article in a corporate entity, and I've been part of corporate entity all my life. I would lose my job if I have 2 bad quarters, for God's sake. I mean, here we have lost 2 Lok Sabha elections, and we are very happy because we met at the lawns of 10 Janpath to decide as to when the Chintan Baitak will happen. Which world are we living in? I mean, it sounded so Jurassic. And I wrote an article because, frankly, nobody in the Congress was willing to listen. And I need to be public here on this, because both Veer and you are wonderful friends. Nobody in the Congress wants to listen to you. I mean, people are very thrilled if Rahul acknowledges an SMS or a WhatsApp or an email. For God's sake, we should be vibrant. We should be talking. You are the challengers. The challenger is supposed to be fighting harder. Here, I find that the Bihar elections are over and JP Nadda is on a 100-day trip to cover all the states. The Congress is meeting on the lawns of 10 Janpath over some samosas and some milky sugary tea to discuss when we have our next Chintan Baitak. I'm sorry, that doesn't gel with me. And I decided to call a spade. And I will fight for the Congress relentlessly, which is why many people in the Congress are shit scared of me, because I call a spade and I have nothing to fear. I'm going to fight for Indian democracy, period.
Great. You answered the second question also. Leading up to that is Rajkumar asking, you've been critical of the Gandhis. Who do you think is the option for Congress?
Well, I do believe that before he left, and people blame him for being a turncoat and Ayaram, Gayaram, but Jyotiraditya Scindia had a lot of terrific strengths going for him. You push him out, yeah, he will join the BJP. After all, he has a political condition. He has got to look after it. Sachin is a good guy. I still believe that the Congress party needs a Sachin Pilot kind of a leader. Again, the Congress has got its own intimacy in politics. So even within G23, we'll have to resolve these issues. But the fact is that there is, in my opinion, the Congress needs to create a president and a 4 vice president structure. Sashi is a good guy too. Now, you don't have to have one leader, kind of doing everything. I mean, today you have Narendra Modi, Amit Shah, and JP Nadda running a government which has been in power for 10 years. And the Congress is running with no one. After 2 defeats, we don't have a Congress president. I mean, how bizarre or ridiculous this is. So my answer to the Congress would be, get a president, support him with 4 vice presidents for North, East, South, and West, maybe a 5th vice president for the Northeast, decentralize, empower. And for God's sake, get hungry, you got to be hungry. You're not going to win an election by not having the hunger to win. Until I see a Congress which is feeling like, we're going to hit the bottle and we're depressed and we're going to see a shrink after a defeat, the Congress is not going to resuscitate itself.
Okay. Anthony Lobo asked, in the absence of a strong national alternative to the BJP, is there any chance of opposition parties getting together? If so, under which leader?
Well, there are 2 realities. One is that politicians hate to lose, and regional parties have a lot of stake because, frankly, where is Samajwadi Party and BSP now? I mean, the Congress can still contest different elections, but where is Mayawati? Where is Akhilesh? Let's face it. So for them, there will be a compulsion of existence. And therefore, the Congress needs to be the fulcrum or the linchpin of getting the parties together. The problem is, and I want to mention this, is that Rahul is not inspiring the kind of confidence to get all the Mamtas and the others together, which is why when this conversation happened about Sharad Pawar leading a UPA, I really don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, the Congress should actually think of talking to Jagan Mohan, Mamta, and Sharad Pawar, because actually they are old Congress people, right? So we created problems for them to leave. So if you have a leader in the Congress who's willing to give the regional leaders some space while you take on the BJP head on in the states where you can beat it, there's a story. So I'll give you one example. The Congress and BJP go head to head in almost 200 Lok Sabha seats. And we guess how many BJP won last time out of those 195, 200? 175. So if the Congress is going to gift it away to the BJP like this, how can you lead even the opposition coalition? So the Congress must fight tooth and nail against BJP where it's head to head, and it should create the ambience or the environment for a complete coalition of other parties.
Sanjay, are you talking of the Maharashtra model? Something like that?
Possible. It's possible. A lot of people said that the Congress party compromised with its secular principles, etc. But listen, the BJP did that in Jammu and Kashmir as well. So I want to just make one point. It's real politics at the end of the day. I think in the politics of Mr. Amit Shah and Mr. Modi, the classical politics won't work. You will have to do some things out of the box. There will have to be some uncomfortable alliances. And I honestly feel when I look at Uddhav here in Maharashtra, he's turning out to be more moderate than maybe some people even in the Congress and the NCP, which is good news. So the Congress has to somewhere down the line get off that high horse. We are not there at the moment, but we should focus on the low-hanging fruits. Beat BJP in Uttarakhand and Himachal and the states where you're in a direct contest, and let the others take care of their states. That will be phase 1, and then phase 2 you work it out.
A question for Veer. Veer, you are a journalist and you've been an editor. Are you not apprehensive about the future of journalism in our country?
Yeah, I am not. I think journalism all over the world is in trouble, and it will continue to be in trouble regardless of whether President Trump had won the election or Mr. Modi wins the next election. These are economic factors. If you're asking whether I'm apprehensive about the future of free speech and free commentary in this country, which could be one interpretation of the question, I'm incredibly apprehensive. I think what's happened to Munawar Farooqi in Indore is a disgrace. This is a stand-up comedian who's been denied bail, has been locked up for a joke that from all base of all the available evidence, he did not even crack. If you look at the makers of Tandav, what they've gone through, we are becoming a society where the fact that I offend somebody is enough to land me in jail. That kind of logic applies only in authoritarian societies, in totalitarian societies. So as long as free expression is in this kind of dangerous zone, then I think I'm apprehensive about everything, not just the future of the media, which is economic.
Here's a question from me to both of you, leading up to what you just said, Veer, which is that our judiciary and our courts were really the last bastion and the last hope of democracy. Always when free speech has been threatened, when films have been banned or things like that have happened, we knew that the courts would stand up for liberty.
Yeah.
What has changed? Why have the courts become what they have? We have to tread carefully on this, but I'm asking both of you.
I'll
So,
take that and then Sanjay can answer it. I think the first thing we need to remember is when we talk about politicization of the judiciary, etc., whatever is wrong with the judiciary, it's the judiciary's own fault. Ever since the collegium was appointed and the judges chose their own successors, they chose other judges, it's become difficult to blame the political establishment. The judiciary must accept responsibility for what's happening. The situation Supreme Court I'll come to later, but the situation in many high courts, and I'm quoting the Supreme Court's own orders and appeals, is appalling. Terrible orders have been passed, which have then been overturned by the Supreme Court, not just on personal liberty, but orders on issues relating to rape, sexual assault. It's seriously concerning. As far as the Supreme Court is concerned, I don't think any of us respect any court in India more than we respect the Supreme Court, which, as you say, has always stood up for liberal values and for personal liberty. But what's becoming clear is that the Supreme Court is shying away from confronting this head on. You have one judge like Chandrachud who spoke out very strongly for liberty in the Arnab Goswami case. But I don't see other judges showing the same enthusiasm as Justice Chandrachud. I think if I was the Chief Justice, which is easy for me to say because I've never become Chief Justice, I would sit down with the judges. I would consider the threats there are to expression, to liberty, on issues like protection of women in this country. I would set out guidelines. I would be a little bit more proactive than I am at the moment, because what we are saying is an anarchy of the judiciary's own making.
Sanjay,
Well,
what's your take? Sanjay, what's your take?
Anil, my view, to add to what Veer said, I completely agree with him, is when four judges of the collegium come in January and give a press conference saying that India's democracy is in danger and that benches are getting fixed. I mean, it's a clear exhibition of the kind of fault lines that exist within the highest courts of the land. And let's bite the bullet here. There are no holy cows in India. Every institution is maligned because it is true that there are serious issues of malfeasance. And I want to make a point here. If you read any of the people who have written books on democracy and its fragility, they all tell you that when institutions die, then democracy is clearly in danger, right? I mean, you can have a BJP today and a Congress tomorrow, but if the institutions of governance are gone or they're infiltrated by cheerleaders of the government, then I think the public is going to be short-charged. And there are three that we are most vulnerable in today. One is the investigation or the law enforcement, which includes an income tax, a CBI, an enforcement directorate, which have become tools of political vendetta. And if they harass you, is the media on your side? Well, today we all know large sections of mainstream media are hugely suspect in terms of the way they are currently, kind of performing their jobs. And then third, you have the courts, because that is your last recourse for the common man. But if they find themselves vulnerable in all the three areas, God save us all. So I do believe that, there is an issue here. If law enforcement, media, and the judiciary is accused of some kind of an institutional capture, then I think we have a lot to worry about.
We're out of time, but I will ask, I'll relate one more question here, which perhaps both of you can answer. This is from Reena Badwar. She says, "Ab ki baar Trump Sarkar," or something to that effect, was said by Narendra Modi. What will be President Biden's attitude to what is happening in India now? Sanjay,
okay, all right. So I will quickly answer that. I do believe that if you have been hearing what Joe Biden or Kamala Harris said about, say, Kashmir, for instance, even during the run-up to the primaries in the Democratic Party, it was very clear that they are going to be more in support of human rights issues. They are going to look at democracy very closely. And while there is no denying that Americans are going to look at their self-interest, India is a big investment magnet for them. So economics and commercial interests will dictate American politics at all times. But the difference is that you're not going to find the kind of unilateral go-ahead that was happening before. The Americans will indeed yet keep India in its strategic interest to counterbalance China. But there is no denying that I think that free pass that Mr. Modi's government had on issues of, say, lynching, murders in India, or Kashmir, internet shutdowns, these are not factors that the Joe Biden administration is likely to ignore. And I think, as a politician, he'll be fully aware of Ab Ki Baar Trump Sarkar in that Howdy Modi rally in Houston. That, I thought, in my opinion, was the ultimate diplomatic snafu.
We'll have the last word.
Well, I agree with them, but I think what we need to remember is that Trump was an aberration. There's never been an American president like him, and hopefully there never will be again. Otherwise, any American president who listened to the State Department would be concerned about human rights, would be concerned about decisions that seem to discriminate against minorities in choosing their trade partners. So I think regardless, we would have had problems. Secondly, we are now in a situation where we seem to be locked in verbal combat, at least with China, and sometimes with armed combat. We need America more than ever, because the Chinese will ride roughshod over us. It's not America who's really a threat. It's us where the immediate threat is. Given this background, I think the attitude we've taken of being very, very pro-Trump needlessly, of insulting members of Congress, saying we don't want you at the meeting, we don't care about you, and now of sort of doing abusive tweets about since Americans or other people who seem to be concerned about what's happening in India, is not going to work. Ultimately, the American presidency is much more susceptible to public opinion than the Indian prime ministership. If there is a sustained call in America for paying attention to human rights in India, paying attention to dissent in India, any American administration, especially a Democratic administration headed by Biden and Harris, will take note. As far as Mr. Modi is concerned, he's a man of great personal charm. Remember that though America banned him from entering the country for many, many years, Barack Obama, who was no conservative, became his big pal, and Mr. Modi charmed his way to Obama. But you can't just charm your way into Biden's good graces. You have to deliver with actual action on the ground. And this is a bullet this government is going to have to bite, if not this week, then next month.
Great. Thanks so much, both of you. That was a very, very lively discussion. Sanjay, Jha, Veer Sanghvi. And Sanjay, good luck with your book.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
I do hope you read it, and those who haven't read it, please do read it, and feel free to criticize me. We start democracy at home. That's where charity starts from.
I'll give an unsolicited plug. It really is a terrific book. I encourage everyone to read it.
Sanjay, is the Congress party buying copies of your book?
To burn them.
I was told by one of the spokespersons that she's going to use it as a reference point, because there's a lot to actually question the government on. So I do hope they are being dispassionate and impartial and not banning the book like they did once with Salman Rushdie, and where the whole downfall of the Congress began from.